Thousands of protesters rallied at the Hong Kong International Airport in a bid to draw attention back to their set of demands ahead of a weekend of protests in the city. Pro-democracy activists kicked off 3 days of rallies at Hong Kong's airport, hoping to win international support from arriving passengers. Demonstrators in black T-shirts and face masks gathered in the airport's arrival hall, carrying pamphlets about their demands. The rallies were promoted on social media with a mock boarding pass reading HK to freedom, as in Hong Kong to freedom, and warm pickup to guests to HK. This will be the second time protesters have brought their message to the international travel hub. The massive travel hub connects the city to more than 220 global destinations, serving at least 74.7 million passengers. The protesters were intending to bring the focus back to the main demands of the protests. The demands were originally released in July, a day after a small group of protesters stormed the Hong Kong legislature. The demands include a full withdrawal of a proposed bill that would allow Hong Kong people to be extradited to mainland China for trial, a retraction of charges against anti-extradition protests, and a retraction of any characterization of the movement as a riot. An independent committee to investigate the Hong Kong police's use of force, universal suffrage in elections for the city's chief executive officer and legislature by 2020. The gatherings at the airport have not been authorized, but the last demonstration at the airport took place peacefully without causing flight disruptions. The sit-in comes ahead of the 10th consecutive weekend of protests. Hong Kong is now reeling from its worst political crisis since Britain handed over the former colony back to China in 1997. And now we have our correspondent Patrick Falk joining us live from Beijing. Patrick, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us over here. 10th consecutive weekend of protests we're looking ahead of, and already the Hong Kong International Airport has been besieged by protesters.
Yeah, well, that's right. There's a series of protests planned for the entire weekend once again. And as far as we understand, these protests, the sit-in even that's taking place at the airport, is meant to be happening for the next 3 days. Just looking at the pictures, it does seem as though the numbers that have gathered at Hong Kong International seem to be much bigger than a couple of weeks ago when we had a sort of similar protest that took place there. Security was meant to have been beefed up, but I'm hearing that instead of manning all the doors, the security who was supposed to be stopping anybody without a ticket within the next 24 hours to travel from coming in, and also unless they were staff operating at the airport. I'm hearing, though, that they only were stopping people coming in through the departure hall, which is a little bit of a strange thing to do, given that anybody who's been to that airport knows that, you know, people can come right off the train and walk right in. And of course, they don't appear to have been stopping people in the arrival hall that connects to the departure hall as well. But, you know, it does seem as though things are peaceful there for the time being, as they were a couple of weeks ago, and things are just carrying on as usual.
Patrick, I want to ask you these latest round of protests are a clear attempt to bring the focus back to the four original demands of the pro-democracy activists in Hong Kong. And that is the focus over here. They've done this in terms of telling the world about the problems that is going on over there when they besieged the train station that takes the train from Hong Kong to Shenzhen. And now is the international attention that they're calling upon, quite literally. But the problem here is that it is going to be extremely difficult for all four of those demands to be met.
Well, I think so, you know, and I think, you know, when you talk about the core demands, we're talking about some of the things that perhaps the protesters feel are most reasonable to ask for. And of course, over the past several weeks, it's morphed into all sorts of different things, including democratic reform, and also for the chief executive to step down. And some people, obviously the most radical of the protesters out there, calling for independence as well. But I think the core protest movement realizes that that's perhaps a bridge too far and not even a realistic or reasonable thing to ask. And the focus has very much been brought back towards withdrawing the bill, calling for an independent investigation and for democratic reform.
Right.
Those are three of the sort of core demands that they're making, and feel that that's a reasonable thing to be asking for.
Right, Patrick, at this stage I want to ask you what exactly is going on in Beijing. Because, you know, China has been watching all of this unfold. The intensity of the protests are only going up by the day, by the hour.
Well, look, there's a growing narrative here that's focusing on the protests being violent and also on foreign interference. Just yesterday, two prominent pro-establishment lawmakers talked about this being impossible, that the students had orchestrated the protest movement, and said that they weren't smart enough to do so because they were using apps like Telegram and using AirDrop as well. There's also been this war of words between the US and China after a diplomat based in Hong Kong was seen meeting with some pro-democracy activists, and the US has subsequently hit back and accused China of thuggish behavior after the personal details and photographs, as well as photographs of the diplomat's children, were published in a pro-establishment newspaper, and this has created quite a bit of anger. The other thing that the State Department has also said is that, look, this is regular protocol for officials or diplomats to be meeting people from a cross-section of society, not just in Hong Kong but in other parts of the world, and the diplomat was just getting on with her usual work. But it does seem as though that China is certainly trying to build a case that there is foreign interference taking place, but those claims so far are tenuous at best. I think a lot of people would agree.
Patrick Falk, our correspondent, joining us with live updates straight from Beijing. Patrick, thank you so much for taking time out to fill us in with what's going on in Beijing and Hong Kong.